The drowning pool. The sun dipped low over Salt Haven, staining the sky a sickly orange. In the heart of the town, Widow's Deep lay as still as glass, a deceptive calm that had fooled tourists and fishermen alike. For the locals, though, the lake was a graveyard, a place whispered about in low voices, a place avoided once the sun began to sink. 12-year-old Leela Parsons was the latest victim. Her body had been pulled from the water hours earlier, her face pale as the moon. Sheriff Davis stood by the edge of the lake, his hat in hand, staring into the rippling surface as if it might offer an explanation. But Widow's Deep was like that. It gave nothing, only took. "That's the third this year," said Earl, the town's oldest fisherman, shaking his head. "The water's hungry again." Teenagers Jack, Mia, Danny, and Sarah watched from the tree line, morbidly fascinated. They were there for Leela's memorial, but morbid curiosity kept them near the lake. Jack, the leader of their little crew, squatted next to a half-burned candle, his brow furrowed. "3 this year, that's not normal, right?" Jack said, glancing at Mia. Mia shivered, pulling her hoodie tighter. "Nothing about this place is normal." Sarah chimed in, her voice hushed. "They say the lake has a spirit, that it takes people." "Yeah," Danny scoffed, trying to sound brave. "And next you're gonna tell me it's haunted by pirates or something. Come on." But even Danny's bravado didn't stop him from glancing nervously at the water. Widow's Deep seemed alive tonight, its surface rippling in a breeze no one could feel. It was Mia who noticed it first, the blood-red smear floating just beneath the surface, like a cloud of ink. "Do you see that?" she whispered. The others turned, following her gaze. At first, it looked like a trick of the light, but the red stain began to grow, spreading outward until it looked as though the entire lake was bleeding. "Something calls." Jack took a hesitant step closer, his sneakers crunching on the rocky shore. "What the hell is that?" As if in response, the water rippled, a low hum rising from the depths. It wasn't loud, but it was there, a sound that made their teeth ache and their stomachs churn. It wasn't human, that was for sure. "Guys, we should go," Mia said, backing away. She wasn't the only one. Sarah grabbed her arm, her eyes wide with fear. But Jack didn't move. He was staring at the lake, his face pale. "Do you hear that? It's saying something." "No, it's not," Danny snapped, grabbing Jack's arm. "Come on, man, don't be stupid." Jack shook him off, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's saying my name." Mia froze. "Jack, don't mess around." "I'm not." Jack took another step forward, his shoes now inches from the water. "It's calling me." Suddenly, the blood-red stain surged toward the shore, a wave of crimson lapping at Jack's feet. He stumbled back, tripping over a rock and landing hard. The others screamed as something broke the surface of the water. A hand. It was skeletal, dripping with lakeweed and slime, its fingers clawing at the air as if searching for something or someone. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, sinking back beneath the surface. The blood-red stain dissipated, leaving the lake as calm and dark as before. A warning ignored. The teens ran, their breaths rag as they reached the safety of the tree line. No one spoke for several minutes, their minds racing to process what they had just seen. We imagined that," Danny finally said, his voice shaking. "Right? It was just the light or something." Mia glared at him. "Are you serious?" That thing almost grabbed Jack. Jack was still pale, his hands trembling as he wiped at his jeans. "It knew my name," he muttered. "How could it know my name?" The group fell silent again, the weight of the experience settling over them. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely audible. "My grandma used to say Widow's Deep was cursed. She said it takes people who don't respect it." "That's just an old story," Danny said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Is it?" Sarah countered. "Then why do people keep dying?" They all looked back at the lake, now barely visible in the encroaching darkness. It seemed to stare back at them, its surface shimmering faintly under the rising moon. None of them could shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Let's get out of here," Mia said, her voice firm. "And we're not coming back. Ever." But as they left, Jack couldn't resist one last glance over his shoulder. The lake was calm again, but he could swear he saw something lurking just beneath the surface. A shadow, dark and hungry, waiting. What lurks beneath Widow's Deep, and why is the lake so hungry? Jack and his friends have unleashed something they don't understand, and the town's secrets may hold the key. Keep reading to uncover the horrifying truth in Session 2, Ghosts of the Deep. Ghosts of the Deep. The next day, Salt Haven was wrapped in a heady fog that clung to the streets and muffled the sounds of the small coastal town. Jack couldn't shake the memory of the blood-red water and the skeletal hand. Every time he closed his eyes, it played on a loop, pulling at his thoughts like the tide. He stared at his breakfast plate, uneaten eggs and toast, as his mom bustled around the kitchen. "You're awfully quiet today," she said, pouring coffee into a chipped ceramic mug. "Everything okay?" Jack considered telling her, but what could he say? That the lake whispered his name, that he saw a hand reaching out of the water. He shook his head. "Yeah, just tired." "Well, finish your food. You've got a long day ahead of you." Long day or not, Jack didn't eat. Instead, he grabbed his hoodie and headed out, the fog swallowing him whole as he made his way to the old Gazeville by the edge of town where he and his friends had agreed to meet. A grim reunion. Mia, Danny, and Sarah were already there when Jack arrived, huddled together for warmth. Sarah looked pale, her eyes darting nervously toward the lake in the distance. "About time," Danny said, though his usual bravado was dulled by the tension in the air. "I was starting to think you chickened out." Jack ignored him, shoving his hands into his pockets. "We need to figure out what's going on. That thing in the water, it wasn't normal." "No kidding," Mia said, her voice sharp. "But what are we supposed to do? Call the sheriff and tell him we saw a ghost? He'll think we're crazy." "He already thinks we're trouble," Sarah added, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "There has to be a reason this is happening. The lake didn't just pick us at random." Sarah hesitated before speaking. "My grandma used to say the lake was cursed because of the people who died there. She said their spirits never left. What if she was right?" Danny rolled his eyes. "Come on, Sarah. Ghost stories? Really?" Mia frowned. "You have a better explanation." Before Danny could respond, a voice cut through the fog. "You kids shouldn't be hanging around here." They turned to see Earl, the old fisherman, leaning heavily on his cane. His weathered face was stern, but there was a glint of fear in his eyes. "Widow's Deep doesn't like visitors," he said, "especially not kids like you, poking around where you don't belong." Jack stepped forward. "What do you mean? Do you know something about the lake?" Earl hesitated, his eyes darting toward the water. "I know enough to stay away. That lake's been cursed longer than I've been alive. Seen too many good folks go missing out there, too many bodies pulled from the deep. You'd do well to stay far from it." "But why?" Mia asked. "What's causing it?" Earl's expression darkened. "Something bad happened there a long time ago. Something that stained the water. Folks don't talk about it, but the lake remembers, and it doesn't forgive." A dangerous curiosity. Earl's warning hung heavy in the air as he shuffled away, disappearing into the fog. The teens stood in silence, the weight of his words pressing down on them. "So, what do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "We figure out what happened," Jack said firmly. "If the lake remembers, maybe we can find out what it's hiding." Danny frowned. "And how are we supposed to do that? It's not like the library has a cursed lake section." "There's a town archive," Mia said, her eyes narrowing in thought. "It's in the basement of the community center. My dad took me there once when he was researching Salt Haven's history. It has records going back over 100 years. Jack nodded. "Then that's where we start." Reluctantly, the others agreed. They split up for the day, promising to meet at the community center after dark when the building would be empty. The archives. The community center basement was cold and smelled of mildew, the dim fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Maya led the group to a row of dusty filing cabinets and wooden shelves stacked with old newspapers and journals. "This is it," she said, pulling open a drawer labeled 1900 to 1925. "Start looking for anything about the lake." For the next hour, they sifted through yellowed pages and brittle documents. Most of it was mundane: town council minutes, fishing reports, and weather records. But then Sarah found something, an article from 1923 with the headline "Mystery Drowning at Widow's Deep." "Listen to this," she said, her voice shaky. A local woman, Eleanor Whitlock, was found drowned in Widow's Deep under suspicious circumstances. Her husband claimed she was taken by the water, but no one believed him. Mia frowned. "That's weird, but it doesn't explain the curse." "Wait," Jack said, pulling out another article. Eleanor's husband, Charles Whitlock, went missing a week later. The townsfolk thought he'd run off, but his body washed up on the shore 2 months later. There's more, Sarah said, flipping through the pages. Eleanor and Charles weren't the only ones. There are other drownings, whole families disappearing, fishermen never coming back. It's like the lake's been feeding on people. Danny groaned. Okay, great. So the lake's a serial killer. What do we do about it? Jack didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on an old photograph tucked into the back of the file. It showed Widow's Deep, but the water was clear, shimmering under the sun. In the background, there was something carved into the rocks by the shore, an intricate symbol that sent a chill down his spine. We need to find that, Jack said, holding up the photo. It might be the key to all of this. A silent warning. They left the community center with the photograph in hand, the fog still clinging to the streets like a shroud. As they walked toward the lake, a deep sense of unease settled over them. The air was heavy, charged with an unspoken threat. When they reached the shore, they found the symbol etched into the rocks, just as it had been in the photograph. It was strange and jagged, almost like a claw, and it seemed to pulse faintly under the moonlight. "What is it?" Sarah whispered. Jack reached out to touch it, but Mia grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said, her voice trembling. "We don't know what it does." Before Jack could respond, the water behind them rippled. Slowly, they turned, their breaths catching in their throats. Standing in the shallows was a figure, a woman, her face pale and her eyes sunken, her clothes dripping wet. "Help me," she whispered, her voice hollow and desperate. But before any of them could move, she dissolved into the water, leaving only ripples behind. Who was the woman by the lake, and what does the strange symbol mean? Jack and his friends are getting closer to the truth, but Widow's Deep has no intention of letting them go. Keep reading for more chills in Session 3. Secrets of Salt Haven. Secrets of Salt Haven. The next day, the fog over Salt Haven had lifted, but the heaviness remained. The small town seemed quieter than usual, its streets nearly empty as Jack and the others met outside Mia's house. The photograph of the strange symbol sat between them on the weathered wooden table, a grim reminder of what they'd seen the night before. "She was real," Sarah whispered, staring at the picture but seeing the ghostly figure from the lake in her mind. "That woman, she wanted something." "Or someone," Danny muttered, kicking at a loose pebble by his foot. He'd been unusually subdued since the encounter, his usual sarcasm replaced with a nervous energy. "We need answers," Jack said, his voice firm. "Earl knows something. He wouldn't talk much before, but maybe if we press him, he'll tell us what he's hiding." Mia frowned. "You think he'll just give up the town's dark secrets because we ask nicely? He's probably been keeping quiet about this for decades." Jack leaned forward, his expression dark. "Then we make him talk." Confronting Earl. Finding Earl wasn't difficult. The old fisherman spent most of his days on the dock repairing nets or sitting in the shade of his small boathouse. When the teens approached, his wary eyes flicked up from the fishing line in his hands. "You kids again," he grumbled. "Didn't I tell you to stay away from that lake?" Jack held up the photograph. "You need to tell us what this is." Earl froze, his weathered face going pale. For a moment, the only sound was the gentle lap of the waves against the dock. "Where'd you get that?" he finally asked, his voice low. "The archives," Mia said, crossing her arms. "It was in a photo from the 1920s. We found it carved into the rocks by the lake." Earl's hand trembled as he set the fishing line aside. "You shouldn't be messing with things you don't understand." "Then explain it to us," Jack said. "What does it mean? Why is the lake doing this?" Earl let out a long, shaky breath, leaning back in his chair. "It's not the lake," he said. "It's what's in the lake. The pact." Earl's voice was barely above a whisper as he began to speak. "Long time ago, before Salt Haven was even a town, there were people here. Settlers. They built homes by the water, thinking it would be their salvation. But the land was harsh, and the winters were worse. They were starving, desperate." He paused, his eyes unfocused as if he were staring into the past. "That's when they made the pact. They offered something to the lake. Blood, sacrifice, in exchange for survival. And it worked. The lake gave them fish, clean water, and safe passage through the storms. But the lake, it remembered. It wanted more." "What do you mean, more?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Earl met her gaze, his eyes hollow. "The settlers tried to stop the sacrifices, thought they could just walk away from the deal. but the lake wouldn't let them. It started taking people. Drownings, disappearances. It didn't matter. The debt had to be paid. Mia's face was pale. And the symbol. It's a marker, Earl said. A warning. It means the lake's been fed. But when the symbol fades, that's when you know it's hungry again. Jack's mind raced. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why let it keep happening? Earl's voice cracked with emotion. What could I do? The lake's been this way for centuries. I'm just an old man trying to survive. If you're smart, you'll stay away and let it be. But Jack wasn't about to back down. What happens if we don't feed it? Earl's expression darkened. It won't stop at the lake. It'll take the whole town. Uncovering the truth. The group left Earl's boathouse in silence, the weight of his story hanging heavy over them. As they walked back toward the center of town, Mia broke the silence. We need proof, she said. If we're going to stop this, we need to know how to break the curse. And how do you suggest we do that? Danny asked. Start sacrificing chickens in the backyard? No, Jack said, his eyes narrowing. We need to find out what they gave the lake. If we know what it wants, maybe we can stop it. Mia nodded. There's only one place left to look, the old church. The others stared at her in confusion. What does the church have to do with this? Sarah asked. It's not just a church, Mia explained. It's one of the oldest buildings in Salt Haven. If the settlers kept records of the pact, that's where they'd be. Reluctantly, the group agreed to investigate. The church was small and weathered, its wooden frame leaning slightly to one side. They slipped inside through a side door, the air thick with the scent of dust and mildew. The hidden journal. Inside, the church was dark and cold, the pews covered in a thin layer of dust. They moved cautiously, searching for anything that might explain the lake's curse. After nearly an hour of searching, Sarah called out, I found something. She held up a small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. Jack took it from her, his fingers trembling as he flipped through the pages. It was written in shaky handwriting, the ink smudged in places. The journal belonged to Charles Whitlock, the man whose wife had drowned in Widow's Deep. His entries were scattered, filled with desperate pleas for forgiveness and warnings about the lake. But it was the final entry that chilled them to the bone. The lake demands what it was promised. Blood for life, life for blood. I tried to break the pact, but it won't let me. It knows, it sees, and now it has her. I can hear her voice in the water, calling for me. There is no escape. The group stood in stunned silence, the implications of the journal sinking in. What do we do now? Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Jack clenched his fists. We end this. Somehow, we end this. The lake stirs. As they left the church, the sky had darkened, thick clouds rolling in over the horizon. A low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, and the air seemed charged with electricity. When they reached Widow's Deep, the lake was eerily still, its surface reflecting the darkening sky. The strange symbol on the rocks seemed to glow faintly, pulsing with an unnatural light. It's awake, Mia whispered, her voice trembling. And then they heard it, a low, guttural sound rising from the depths of the lake. It wasn't human, and it wasn't natural. It was hungry. What does Widow's Deep want, and how far will it go to claim its prize? Jack and his friends are running out of time as the lake's hunger grows. Can they stop the curse, or will they become its next victims? Find out in Session 4, The Hungry Waters. The Hungry Waters. The storm that had threatened all day broke as night fell, heavy rain hammering down on Salt Haven. Widow's Deep churned in the downpour, its surface alive with restless waves. Lightning streaked across the sky, briefly illuminating the terrified faces of Jack, Mia, Danny, and Sarah as they stood at the edge of the cursed lake. They hadn't planned to return so soon, but something had changed. The symbol on the rocks, once faint and weathered, now glowed with an eerie, pulsing light as if the lake itself was beckoning them. It wasn't just hungry anymore, it was awake. We shouldn't be here, Sarah whispered, clutching her coat tight around her. It's not safe. It's never been safe, Jack said, his voice firm despite the fear tightening his chest. But if we don't figure this out, it's going to keep taking people. We have to stop it. Mia stepped closer to the edge of the lake, her hood pulled up against the rain. The journal said the lake demands blood. Maybe it's warning us that it's time for another sacrifice. Another? Danny scoffed, though his voice wavered. That's insane. Who even started this whole thing? Why should we pay for what they did? Jack didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the water, where the faint outline of a figure could be seen just beneath the surface. It wasn't moving, but it was there, waiting. "We need answers," he said finally, "and the only way to get them is to go deeper." Into the deep. The others stared at him in shock. "You can't be serious," Mia said, stepping back. "You want to go into the lake?" Jack nodded, his jaw set. "The settlers made the pact with whatever's down there. Maybe it's still there. Maybe we can reason with it." Danny threw up his hands. "Reason with it? You've lost your mind. That thing's a monster." "It's either that or wait for it to come for us," Jack shot back. "It knows who we are. It knows our names. If we don't do something, we're next." The group fell silent, the weight of Jack's words sinking in. Finally, Mia nodded. "If you're going, I'm going too." "Me too," Sarah whispered, though she looked like she might faint. All eyes turned to Danny, who groaned. "Fine," he muttered. "But if we die, I'm haunting all of you." Jack managed a faint smile, but it didn't last. The lake was waiting. The first dive. They didn't have proper gear, just flashlights, a length of rope, and the courage born of desperation. Jack tied the rope around his waist, handing the other end to Danny. "Don't let go," he said, "no matter what." Danny nodded, his usual smirk replaced with a grim determination. Jack waded into the water, the cold biting at his skin even through his clothes. The others watched anxiously as he disappeared beneath the surface, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the murky depths. The lake was darker than he expected, the water thick and unyielding. Jack swam deeper, the pressure building in his ears as he followed the faint glow of the symbol carved into the rocks below. It wasn't just a carving, it was a doorway. He hesitated, fear clawing at his chest. But then he heard it, a voice, faint but insistent, calling his name. "Jack." He swam closer, the light growing brighter as the voice grew louder. And then he saw it, a massive, writhing shape coiled behind the doorway. It was impossible to describe, its form shifting and churning like liquid shadow. Eyes, dozens of them, blinked open, fixing on Jack with an unrelenting hunger. The voice came again, this time clearer. "Blood for life, life for blood. The lake strikes back." Jack panicked, kicking away from the doorway as fast as he could. The thing behind it surged forward, its many eyes glowing like lanterns in the dark. Jack's chest burned as he scrambled for the surface, his lungs screaming for air. He broke through with a gasp, the rain and wind whipping around him. "Pull me in," he shouted, his voice hoarse. Danny and Mia hauled him onto the shore, where he collapsed in a heap. "What happened?" Mia asked, kneeling beside him. Jack struggled to catch his breath. "There's something down there. It's alive, and it's angry." Before they could process his words, the water erupted behind them. A massive wave surged toward the shore, dragging debris and lakeweed in its wake. The teens scrambled back as the wave crashed down, flooding the shoreline. In the chaos, Sarah screamed, "It's coming!" They turned to see a shape rising from the water, a towering figure made of darkness and lakeweed, its many eyes glowing in the stormy night. It moved toward them, each step sending ripples through the flooded ground. "We have to go," Mia shouted, grabbing Jack's arm. But Jack stood frozen, staring at the creature. "It's the lake," he said. "It's the curse." The creature let out a guttural roar, the sound rattling their bones. It lunged toward them, its shadowy limbs reaching out like claws. A narrow escape. The group ran, their hearts pounding as the creature pursued them. The storm made the ground slick and treacherous, but they didn't dare slow down. The thing from the lake was relentless, its glowing eyes cutting through the darkness like beacons. They'd reached the tree line, the creature still behind them. But as it stepped onto dry land, it hesitated. Its body seemed to waver, the shadows pulling back toward the water. "It can't leave the lake," Maya realized, her voice breathless. The creature roared again, its frustration evident. Slowly, it retreated, sinking back into the depths. The glow of its eyes lingered for a moment before disappearing entirely. The teens collapsed in the safety of the woods, their bodies shaking with fear and exhaustion. "What the hell was that?" Danny asked, his voice breaking. "It's what's been taking people," Jack said, his face pale. "It's the lake's guardian, or maybe it's the curse itself." "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with terror. Jack looked back at the lake, its surface calm once more. "We fight," he said. Whatever it takes, we fight. The curse of Widow's Deep has revealed itself, and it's more dangerous than Jack and his friends ever imagined. Can they uncover the secrets of the lake before it's too late? The battle is just beginning in Session 5. Bloodlines and Bargains. Bloodlines and Bargains. The storm passed, leaving Widow's Deep shrouded in eerie stillness. The events of the night before weighed heavily on Jack and his friends as they regrouped at Mia's house. The ghostly apparition, the monstrous creature, the glowing symbol, all of it pointed to one terrifying truth. The curse of Widow's Deep wasn't just folklore. It was real, and it was after them. Mia spread the journal and the photograph out on the table. This thing, whatever it is, isn't just mindless. It's tied to the pact, and it knows us. Jack nodded, his jaw clenched. Earl said the lake remembers. It's like it's keeping track of who owes it a debt. Debt for what? Danny asked, pacing nervously. We didn't make any deal. Our ancestors did. Doesn't matter, Mia said, tapping the journal. The pact wasn't just for them. It was for their bloodline. That's why it's coming for us. Sarah's voice was trembling as she spoke. So what do we do? Just wait for it to take us. No, Jack said firmly. We need to figure out how to end the pact. There has to be a way to break it. Danny frowned, and if there isn't? Jack looked him in the eye. Then we make one. A family secret. Their search for answers led them to Sarah's grandmother, a frail woman who lived in a small house on the outskirts of town. Her sharp eyes widened when the teens explained what they'd seen. You shouldn't be meddling with this, she said, her voice quivering. The lake, it doesn't forgive. We don't have a choice, Jack said. It's already after us. We need to know how to stop it. The old woman hesitated, her gnarled hands trembling as she reached for her teacup. The pact was made long ago, she said finally, by the first settlers. They were desperate, starving. A figure came to them, a creature from the lake. It promised them survival in exchange for blood. At first, they offered animals, but over time, it demanded more. People, Mia said grimly. Her grandmother nodded. The settlers tried to end the pact. They thought they could trick the lake, give it less than it asked for. But you can't cheat something like that. It's bound to the water, to the blood it's owed. It punished them, and the debt was passed down to their children, and their children's children. Jack leaned forward. There has to be a way to end it. A ritual, a spell, something. The old woman's eyes darkened. The only way to end the pact is to fulfill its terms. Blood for life, a life willingly given. The room fell silent. The weight of her words hung over them like a storm cloud. Someone has to die, Sarah whispered. The bargain. Back at the lake, the group stood in tense silence, the glowing symbol on the rocks casting faint light onto their faces. The journal lay open on the ground, its pages fluttering in the breeze. We're not sacrificing anyone, Jack said firmly. There has to be another way. Danny scoffed. Oh sure, let's just ask the bloodthirsty lake monster to play nice. I'm sure that'll work. Enough, Mia snapped. We're not doing anything without a plan. Jack stepped closer to the water's edge, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The creature, whatever it is, wants us to come to it. That's why it's been trying to scare us. It knows we're connected to the pact. And you're just going to walk into its trap? Danny asked, his voice rising. You're insane. We don't have a choice, Jack said, turning to face the group. It's either that, or we let it keep killing people. If there's even a chance we can reason with it, we have to try. Mia stepped forward. I'm going with you. Me too, Sarah said, though her voice trembled. Danny hesitated, then sighed. Fine, but if we're doing this, we're doing it together. Into the abyss. The four teens waded into the lake, the cold water biting at their skin as they moved deeper. The glowing symbol grew brighter as they approached the spot Jack had seen the night before. The doorway was still there, pulsing faintly beneath the surface. Jack took a deep breath, then dove beneath the water. The others followed, their flashlights slicing through the murky depths. The pressure built as they swam closer to the doorway, the water seeming to close in around them. And then, they saw it, the creature. It was massive, its form shifting and writhing like liquid shadow. Dozens of glowing eyes blinked open, fixing on them with a predatory hunger. The voice came again, echoing in their minds. Blood for life, life for blood. Jack forced himself to swim closer. We're here to end this, he said, his words muffled by the water. The creature didn't respond, but the pressure around them grew stronger, pulling them closer to the doorway. Jack reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of the glowing symbol. The voice spoke again, louder this time. A life must be given, willingly. Jack's mind raced. The creature wasn't just demanding a sacrifice, it wanted them to choose. The pact had always been about bloodlines, about choice. The settlers had made the deal, and now it was up to their descendants to uphold it or defy it. A terrible decision. Breaking the surface, Jack gasped for air, the others following close behind. They stumbled onto the shore, their bodies trembling with cold and fear. "It wants us to pick," Jack said, his voice hoarse. "One of us has to go willingly." Mia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "We can't do that. There has to be another way." "There isn't," Danny said bitterly. "It's either one of us or it keeps killing." "You heard it." Silence fell as the group grappled with the impossible choice. Finally, Jack spoke, his voice steady. "We'll find another way. We just need more time." But deep down, he wasn't sure they had any time left. The curse of Widow's Deep demands a sacrifice, but Jack and his friends aren't ready to give in. Can they defy the lake's will, or will it claim one of them as its own? Don't miss the next chilling chapter in Session 6, Descent into the Abyss. Descent into the Abyss. The night after their encounter with the creature, Jack, Mia, Danny, and Sarah gathered in Jack's garage, a dim bulb casting shadows over the collection of maps, journals, and old photographs they had scavenged. The air was heavy with fear and exhaustion, but none of them were ready to give up. "We have to think this through," Mia said, pacing. "If we can't stop the pact by fulfilling it, then we need to break it another way." "Easier said than done," Danny muttered, slouched in a chair. "We're talking about something that's been around for centuries. What makes us think we can outsmart it?" Jack ignored him, pointing to the journal on the table. Charles Whitlock tried to break the pact and failed because he didn't know what he was dealing with. "But we've seen it. We know it's real. And we know it can be hurt," Mia added. "That thing hesitated when it left the lake last night. It has limits." Sarah, who had been quiet for most of the evening, spoke up. "What if the pact isn't just about blood? What if it's tied to the symbol? Everything goes back to that. On the rocks, in the journal, even under the water." Jack's eyes lit up with realization. If the symbol is the key, then maybe we don't need to give it blood. Maybe we just need to destroy the connection. Mia frowned. "Destroy it how? We don't even know what it's made of." Jack looked at her, his voice resolute. "We find out. Tonight." Preparing for the descent. The group spent the next few hours gathering supplies, flashlights, knives, an old dive mask Jack found in his dad's shed, and the strongest rope they could find. By the time they reached Widow's Deep, the moon was high in the sky, casting a cold, silver light over the lake. "This is insane," Danny muttered as they stood at the water's edge. "We're actually going back in there." "You don't have to come," Jack said, adjusting the rope around his waist. Danny sighed, shaking his head. "Yeah, right. Like I'm gonna let you idiots get yourselves killed without me." Jack managed a faint smile before turning to the others. "Remember, stay together. And if anything happens, get back to the surface. No heroics." Mia nodded, her jaw set. "Let's end this." The descent. The water was colder than before, sending chills through their bodies as they swam deeper. The glowing symbol on the rocks pulsed faintly, a beacon guiding them toward the doorway. The pressure in Jack's chest grew as they approached, but he forced himself to keep going. When they reached the doorway, the creature was waiting. It was even larger than before, its form coiled around the glowing portal like a guardian. Its eyes blinked open, fixing on the group with an unsettling intelligence. The voice echoed in their minds once again. "Blood for life, life for blood." Jack steeled himself, holding up a knife. "We're not here to give you anything. We're here to end this." The creature's form shifted, its many limbs rippling like liquid shadow. The voice grew louder, angrier. "You cannot defy the pact. Blood will flow." Mia swam forward, her flashlight illuminating the edges of the symbol. "Look at this," she shouted, pointing to faint lines etched into the rock. "It's part of a circle, there's more." Jack followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing. "If we break the circle, maybe we break the connection." "Worth a shot," Danny muttered, gripping his flashlight like a weapon. The fight. As they worked to find the rest of the circle, the creature attacked. its limbs lashed out, the water around them churning with violent currents. Jack barely dodged a swipe, the force of it sending him tumbling backward. "Keep it busy," Mia shouted, her voice muffled by the water. Danny grabbed a rock and hurled it at the creature, hitting one of its glowing eyes. The creature recoiled, letting out a guttural roar that shook the water. Jack and Sarah took the opportunity to swim to the other side of the doorway, their flashlights illuminating the faint outlines of the circle etched into the stone. "There," Jack shouted, pointing to a crack in the rock. "If we widen that, it might disrupt the symbol." Mia swam over, pulling a crowbar from her belt. She jammed it into the crack and began to pry, her muscles straining against the resistance. The creature roared again, surging toward her, but Danny intercepted it, slashing at one of its limbs with his knife. "Hurry," Danny shouted, his voice tinged with panic. With a final, desperate effort, Mia wrenched the crowbar, and the rock split with a deafening crack. The glowing symbol flickered, its light dimming. The creature let out a bone-chilling scream, its form thrashing wildly as the water around them seemed to ripple with energy. "It's working," Sarah shouted, the creature's wrath. But the fight wasn't over. The creature, though weakened, lunged toward the group with renewed fury. It grabbed Mia, dragging her toward the doorway. She struggled, her knife slashing at its shadowy limbs, but it was too strong. "No!" Jack shouted, swimming toward her. He plunged his knife into the creature's side, the blade meeting resistance before sinking in. The creature roared, releasing Mia, who swam back to the group, gasping for breath. The glowing portal began to collapse, the edges crumbling into the dark water. The creature let out one final scream before retreating into the depths, its many eyes disappearing into the void. The group swam frantically to the surface, their lungs burning as they broke through the water. They dragged themselves onto the shore, coughing and gasping for air. "It's gone," Jack said, his voice trembling. "We did it." But as they looked back at the lake, its surface calmed once more. An uneasy silence settled over them. The symbol was gone, the glow extinguished, but the lake still felt alive, watching, waiting. A chilling revelation. Back at Jack's garage, the group tried to make sense of what had happened. The journal, the symbol, the creature, it all pointed to one terrifying possibility. "The pact might be broken," Mia said, her voice hesitant. "But I don't think the lake is done with us." Jack nodded, staring at the photograph of Widow's Deep. "We stopped it for now. But if we missed anything, if there's still a connection." Danny groaned, running a hand through his hair. "Great, so now we're on the lake's hit list forever." Sarah shivered, her voice barely audible. Maybe breaking the symbol wasn't enough. Jack looked at her, his face grim. "Then we'll finish it, whatever it takes." The pact may be broken, but the lake's curse lingers. What did Jack and his friends miss, and how far will they go to end the nightmare once and for all? The battle continues in Session 7. A sacrifice must be made. The days that followed their desperate escape from Widow's Deep were eerily quiet. Too quiet. Salt Haven went about its usual routines, but Jack and his friends couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The lake wasn't done with them, not yet. Jack sat in his garage, staring at the journal. Its pages were tattered and water-stained, the final entries looping in maddened scrawls. Every time he read the last line, it sent a chill through him. Blood for life, life for blood. The lake will always take what it is owed. The others trickled in one by one. Mia was pale but determined, Danny paced like a caged animal, and Sarah looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Anything new?" Mia asked, sitting beside Jack. He shook his head. "The symbol's gone. The creature retreated, but I can't shake the feeling we missed something." "We broke the pact," Danny said, leaning against the workbench. "What else does it want?" "Us," Sarah whispered. Her voice was so soft they almost didn't hear her. When they turned to her, she was staring at the floor. "The lake still knows our names. We're connected to it. Breaking the symbol didn't change that." Mia frowned. "So what do we do? We can't just wait for it to come back." Jack took a deep breath, his expression grim. "We end this, for good." A desperate plan. The idea was reckless, even by their standards. Jack proposed confronting the lake one last time, not to fight it, but to offer a trade. If the lake wanted a sacrifice, maybe they could give it something else, something it would accept in exchange for sparing their lives. "It's crazy," Danny said, shaking his head. You're talking about bargaining with a monster. It's better than waiting for it to pick us off one by one, Jack argued. But what could we even offer? Mia asked. The lake's taken people for centuries. What do we have that's worth that? Jack hesitated, his gaze dropping to the journal. Ourselves. The room fell silent. What are you saying? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. I'm saying we offer it a choice, Jack said. One of us goes willingly, the rest are spared. No way, Danny snapped, his face pale. That's insane. It's the only way, Jack said, his voice firm. We can't fight it. We can't escape it. But if we can satisfy it, maybe it'll leave the others alone. No, Mia said sharply, there has to be another way. Jack's expression was haunted. There isn't. The return to the lake. That night, they returned to Widow's Deep, the weight of Jack's plan hanging heavy over them. The lake was calm, its surface reflecting the full moon like a mirror. It looked almost peaceful, but they all knew better. Jack stood at the water's edge, the journal clutched in his hand. If we're going to do this, we do it now. Mia grabbed his arm. We're not letting you do this alone. You're not choosing this, Sarah said, her voice trembling. We'll find another way. There is no other way, Jack said, pulling free. If we don't make a choice, the lake will make one for us. Before anyone could stop him, he stepped into the water. The lake demands. The moment Jack waded into Widow's Deep, the lake came alive. The water churned, waves crashing against the shore as the glowing symbol reappeared, pulsing with an unnatural light. The creature emerged from the depths, its many eyes fixating on Jack. The voice echoed in their minds, louder than ever. Blood for life, life for blood. Jack took a deep breath, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at him. You want a life? Take me, but you leave them alone. No more hunting, no more deaths. The creature hesitated, its massive form looming over him. The glowing eyes blinked, as if considering his words. Then the voice came again, quieter this time. Will you give freely? Yes, Jack said, his voice shaking. I give freely. A twist of fate. The creature surged forward, its shadowy limbs wrapping around Jack. He gasped as the water pulled him under, his friends screaming his name from the shore. The cold was all-encompassing, the weight of the lake pressing down on him as he sank deeper and deeper. And then, nothing. Jack opened his eyes. He was standing on the bottom of the lake, surrounded by swirling shadows. The creature loomed before him, but its form was different now, less monstrous, more human. It extended a hand, and Jack hesitated before taking it. The voice echoed in his mind one last time. You would give your life for theirs, but will they do the same for you? Before Jack could respond, the shadows vanished, and he was pulled back to the surface. Gasping for air, he stumbled onto the shore, his friends rushing to his side. You're alive, Mia cried, tears streaming down her face. The lake let you go, Danny asked, stunned. Jack shook his head, his voice hoarse. It wasn't a sacrifice, it was a test. The final warning. As they stared out at the lake, its surface calm once more, Jack spoke quietly. The pact is broken, but the lake's hunger isn't gone. It'll come back, maybe not for us, but for someone. So what do we do? Sarah asked. Jack looked at his friends, his expression resolute. We make sure no one else ever comes here. We warn the town. We protect them. The others nodded, their bond stronger than ever. Together, they walked away from Widow's Deep, leaving the cursed waters behind, but knowing the fight wasn't over. The pact may be broken, but the lake's hunger remains. Jack and his friends have survived, but the question lingers. How long can the curse be kept at bay? Don't miss the chilling conclusion in Session 8, Blood in the Water. Salt Haven awoke to a strange stillness. The air felt heavy, as though the storm that had ravaged Widow's Deep had left something behind, an invisible mark on the town. For Jack and his friends, the events of the night before hung over them like a shadow. Jack sat in his room, staring at the photograph of the lake. It was a serene image, taken decades ago, before the settlers had carved the pact into the rocks. But to him, it looked alive, watching, waiting. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Mia, her face pale but determined. They found someone, she said. Jack's stomach dropped. What? At the lake? A fisherman. His boat was overturned, and they found his body on the shore. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. But the pact didn't end the lake's hunger. Mia interrupted. You said it yourself. We stopped the curse, but we didn't destroy whatever's in the water. Jack stood, his jaw clenched. Then we finish it. A town in denial. The group met at the gazebo, their usual meeting spot. Danny and Sarah were already there, both looking shaken. Did you hear? Sarah asked as they approached. Another person's dead. The whole town's talking about it. But they don't know the truth, Danny added bitterly. They think it's just another freak accident. They don't know what's really in that lake. And they can't know, Jack said firmly. If the town finds out, they'll panic. Or worse, someone might think they can make another pact. Mia nodded. We keep this between us. But if we're going to stop the lake for good, we need help. Jack frowned. From who? Earl? Mia shook her head. From someone who doesn't want the lake to win. The witch's warning. The group visited an old woman named Marlene, a local recluse known for her knowledge of the occult. Her small, cluttered house smelled of herbs and smoke, and strange symbols were painted on the walls. You stirred the waters, Marlene said when they explained their story. The lake knows you defied it. That's why it's lashing out. We need to destroy it, Jack said. How do we kill it? The battle for Widow's Deep is over, but the scars remain. Will Salt Haven ever truly escape its curse, or is the lake's hunger merely lying dormant? Share this story and keep its memory alive, because some things are too dangerous to be forgotten. The end. Marlene chuckled, though there was no humor in it. You don't kill a force like that. You bind it. Trap it where it can't hurt anyone. How? Mia asked, her voice urgent. Marlene handed them a bundle of old papers, her expression grave. These are binding spells. They'll weaken the lake's power, but only if you perform them at the source. The source? Danny asked. You mean the bottom of the lake? Marlene nodded. That's where the settlers made their pact. That's where you'll end it. Jack took the papers, his resolve hardening. We'll do it. Marlene's voice dropped to a whisper, but be warned, the lake won't let you leave unscathed. The final descent. They returned to Widow's Deep that night, the binding spells clutched tightly in Jack's hands. The moon was high, casting an eerie glow over the water. The lake was calm, but the group could feel its presence, a watchful malevolence waiting beneath the surface. They suited up with the last of their gear, each one carrying a flashlight and a copy of the spell. Jack looked at his friends, his voice steady but strained. No matter what happens, we stick together. We don't leave anyone behind. Mia nodded. Let's end this. The water was freezing as they dove in, the dark depths swallowing them whole. The pressure built as they swam toward the glowing doorway, the light faint but unmistakable. The creature was there, its massive form coiled around the entrance. But this time, they were ready. The ritual. Jack swam forward, holding the binding spell in front of him. He began to chant the words Marlene had given them, his voice muffled by the water but steady. The creature roared, its shadowy limbs thrashing as it surged toward him. Mia and Sarah flanked Jack, chanting their parts of the spell while Danny threw rocks at the creature, keeping it at bay. The water churned violently, the force of the creature's anger pulling them in every direction. The glowing symbol began to change, its light dimming as the spell took hold. The creature screamed, its form flickering as if it were being torn apart. We're doing it, Mia shouted, her voice muffled but triumphant. But the lake wasn't going down without a fight. The ultimate sacrifice. As the ritual neared its end, the creature lunged at Jack, its shadowy limbs wrapping around him. He screamed, his flashlight falling from his hand as he was pulled toward the doorway. Jack, Mia shouted, swimming after him. No, Jack cried, struggling against the creature's grip. Finish the spell. Don't stop. Mia hesitated, her heart breaking as Jack disappeared into the darkness. But she knew he was right. If they stopped now, the lake would never be defeated. With tears streaming down her face, she resumed the chant, her voice growing louder as the others joined in. The symbol shattered, its glow extinguished in a burst of light. The creature let out one final scream before vanishing into the void. The water calmed, the eerie silence returning as the lake went still. Aftermath. Mia, Danny, and Sarah broke the surface, gasping for air. They swam to shore, collapsing onto the muddy ground, but Jack didn't follow. Jack, Mia called, her voice cracking. Jack. But the lake remained silent. They waited for hours, but there was no sign of him. Eventually, they left, their hearts heavy with grief. The legacy of Widow's Deep. Days turned into weeks, and the lake was quiet. No more deaths, no more strange occurrences. The townsfolk believed the storm had passed, but Mia, Danny, and Sarah knew better. They stood at the edge of Widow's Deep one last time, the weight of Jack's sacrifice heavy on their shoulders. "He saved us," Sarah whispered, "but at what cost?" Mia nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "We'll make sure it wasn't for nothing. No one else will ever suffer because of this place." As they turned to leave, the water rippled faintly, and for a moment, they thought they saw a figure standing in the shallows. A boy with messy hair and a determined smile. But when they blinked, he was gone. The lake was still, but they knew it would never forget. The battle for Widow's Deep is over, but the scars remain. Will Salt Haven ever truly escape its curse, or is the lake's hunger merely lying dormant? Share this story and keep its memory alive, because some things are too dangerous to be forgotten. The end.